Arrays and ranges and a lot of other Ruby objects respond to methods that accept what are called blocks, which are one of Ruby's most powerful features, but also one of its most confusing. So let's take a look at some examples of blocks in order to understand how they work. Let's start with a range, 1 dot dot 5. That's just 1 up to 5. Now suppose that for each of these elements we wanted to print out twice that value. So the way to do that would be to iterate through this range and then print out 2 times each value. In Ruby, we can express that by saying 1 dot dot 5 dot each, and then we're going to use a curly brace, and we're going to put a variable in these vertical pipe characters. And now we have a local variable called I, and we can print out twice that. So multiplication is just asterisk. And there we go. So you can see that this each actually returns the range, but in between it printed out each of these values. So this thing here, everything inside the curly braces, is a block. And what's going on here is that each method that we're calling on the range accepts a block argument. So this block is going into each, and then each is actually executing this. It's calling the block inside of each. There's a second equivalent way, or almost exactly equivalent way, to indicate a block, which is with the do keyword, so do and then the name of the block variable in this case. Different blocks take different numbers of variables. In this case, it's just 1. So 1 up to 5 dot each do I. Do the same thing, just double everything. So this kind of block is using do end, and it has the same effect. In this case, the contents of the block are just this thing here. It's just one line, so it easily fits here. But blocks are often multi-line, and the convention that I use, which is a common convention in the Ruby world, is to use curly braces for single-line blocks and do end for multi-line blocks. This is a quick example of a multi-line block. Let's just up arrow. Let's print a separator. There we go. This could be done in one line. It actually, let's do this. You can put a semicolon in here. This is a little confusing, but just to show you what can happen. You might see this in other people's code. I won't ever use this in this tutorial again, but a semicolon can be used to separate statements. But this style is generally much less clear, I think, than this. This is a lot clearer. As I mentioned, blocks can be quite confusing, and I really think the best way to learn about blocks is just to see lots of examples. Unless you've done a lot of programming, it's likely that you never encounter anything quite like a block. So in that spirit, let's look at some more examples. There's a times method that you can pass to an integer. So it's 3.times. Let's print out the word Beetlejuice. All right, this is just hanging, and I was confused. I thought, what is going on? Why isn't this working? And the answer is because I forgot the closing quote right in here. So let's Control-C this to quit and do this here. Here we go. Now we'll print Beetlejuice 3 times. Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice. Another example is one of my favorites called map. So suppose we wanted to take a range, 1 up to 5, and construct an array consisting of the squares of each of those elements. So you could do this with an auxiliary variable and each, but map is the best way to do it. In fact, let's do that. Let me just do it the long way. You can say squares is the empty array. 1 dot dot 5 dot each. What we can do is, for each of these guys, we can say squares, remember the shovel operator to push something on, and then I squared. So I, And Ruby uses 2 asterisks for square. So there the squares is 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, so that's great. But there's a faster way to do this, more compact, using the map method. So instead of defining an extra variable, we can do this. 1 dot dot 5 dot map, and then the same block. So rather than doing squares equals empty array and then using the shovel operator inside of the block, we could just do something like this. If we wanted a variable, we could just assign it like that. We can look at a couple other examples of map. I'm going to map onto a literal array of strings. Remember, %w returns an array of strings like this. So suppose I wanted to calculate the uppercase version of this. We could just make an array, rather, of the uppercase versions of these. So let's do, remember, this variable here can be anything, so I'm just going to call it char. Ordinarily, I might use the letter C here for character, but I don't want to confuse it with this. It would still work, but it would just be less clear, I think. So there's an upcase method on characters. We can do the opposite. Complementary downcase method. Oops, I did something wrong there. Oh, I forgot to put the W there. So let's get that to work. There we go. By the way, there's a shorthand. Actually, I don't like this space. Oops. I'm really very detail-oriented when it comes to these things. There we go. So there's actually a way to handle this case where we're calling the same method on every element. There's a compact notation for this. Let me just show you that. So instead of this, we can do this. Array.map, we're about to talk about one of these elements. So I'm going to put an ampersand. This is weird looking syntax, but you could do ampersand and then a symbol. It's not that. Downcase, that's the name of the method. So downcase, downcase. This is the same thing. Now, the reason I mention this is that this notation, which is equivalent to this up here, was actually introduced by Rails. I mentioned that Rails sometimes extends Ruby. So this used to be a Rails extension to Ruby, but people liked it so much that it's now part of core Ruby.